Hello, good morning, very early morning here in Florida, USA. Welcome to the Humanly Possible channel. I am Don McCarty. I am an adult survivor of abandonment, parental abduction, and severe parental alienation. I am joined tonight by my amazing co-host and partner of Humanly Possible, Alyse Tobler. I will turn it over to her to tell you a little bit more about herself and the amazing things that she is accomplishing before we introduce who our guest is. So Alyse, take it away.
Hello everybody from Sydney. It's evening here. And welcome to our interview with Dr. Child. We're very, very excited. He's over in Scotland at the moment. So we have a Florida, a Sydney, and a Scotland. And I'm a clinical psychotherapist and an adult child of severe parental alienation, as is Dawn. And during our interviews, we love to bring in some of the experts and hear what they have to say and in the field of parental alienation. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nick Child to you all today, and we really, really hope that you'll enjoy this interview. So welcome, Dr. Child.
Thank you, Alyse. Thank you, Dawn. Yes, this is Scotland. It's a beautiful blue summer warm day outside here at 11 a.m. And thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to having an open-ended conversation about wherever it takes us. I would say my main qualification to be in this field at all is my ignorance, in that it's only 10 years ago when I was 60 that I discovered that I was ignorant about parental alienation, actively ignorant, like many professionals still are. And the person who taught me that I was ignorant was a client who I nearly said, "We don't believe in that, go away." And he said, well, just could you be more sensible and listen to me? And so he sent me a textbook, Amy Baker's book, Adult Children, Grown Up Like Yourselves. And it was so stunning, especially the comparison with cults, which I've since become very interested in, what they tell us about families, coercive relationships. So 10 years ago, I discovered I was ignorant. And since I had thought I was an intelligent, free-thinking maverick kind of a psychiatrist and family therapist, I was rather shocked. And so I spent the last 10 years trying to make up for that ignorance by not so much working directly with clients or court work, because I thought if I did that, it would drive me crazy and I would probably help 6 people, and I thought I could use my other skills better to learn and research and organize and campaign and anything else that came to hand. So that my most recent focus is on prevention, big prevention, that is way back upstream, beyond upstream, to try and work out what on earth has made the world end up like this, with this particular awful pattern, and family courts not knowing how to deal with it. There's of course a longer story than that, but that's my short story.
That's the short one. Wow. Well, we're so glad that you are here with us today and that you accepted our invitation to speak with you. And there's so many different things in there that are very interesting to both Alyse and I, because not just being children of divorce and separation, being alienated and abducted, so we have all of that, but there's also some intriguing conversations, I think, in there with the cult aspect. And something that I had recently said before even meeting Alyse even, was that I felt like some of my childhood felt like I was a member of a cult.
Yes.
And maybe that was due to the religion that I was raised in, or just the practices that my parents maybe applied because of a religion or not. I mean, maybe it was just the parental alienation piece as well, but there's so many different aspects to that. Alyse, do you have anything to add as far as the topics?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting topic, and I'd love to hear more about, especially about the cult enmeshment and the parental alienation enmeshment, because working with adult children of PA myself, and I do also get adults who've come from and some are still in cults. So a lot of them do talk about the enmeshment that they experienced as children. And I have one woman who comes in very, very, very serious childhood within a cult, was adopted and into a cult as a baby, and has huge issues around abandonment and identity and enmeshment. And it's very interesting, no parental alienation whatsoever, but there's a lot of the symptoms that she has are very similar to the adult children of PA. So yeah, we'd love to hear more about your work around that, and also prevention of PA too, and what your ideas are around that too.
So if I just take off with the cult bit first, as I say, Amy Baker's book was originally a paper for a cult, a journal, an academic journal about cults, so that it was originally done for that purpose. And my interest was to show, and I've done it in various ways. There's a blog that I did called Learning About a Common Enemy. The idea is, if you look at cults and the coercive control in that, and if you look at bullying and gangs and trafficking and terrorist movements, and then you look at domestic violence and coercive control and child abuse and parental alienation, you will see the pattern is virtually identical all the way through.
And extremist terrorism as well?
Well, the recruitment of a terrorist to put their own life and death as above the life and death of other people, that's a kind of crazy thing to do. Mm-hmm. And very often you'll find that, and again, I'm not an expert on it, but the people who study it will see that the same methods of recruitment and retention and promotion, using ideology and language and preventing you, taking you in and cutting you off from all other sources of information and influence, cutting you off from your other family and your friends. All of these techniques are used as much in the cult of terrorist development, extreme terrorism, as there is in recruiting to Scientology or Jehovah's Witnesses, and many thousands of other more minor cults. And Steve Hassan would say, and there's cults of two people, so that would be like coercive control in families. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested, the reason I'm interested is to learn from all, we're all in this together, including domestic violence, child abuse, concern. It's the same pattern. If you look at the new laws in the UK, in Scotland and England about coercive controlling relationships, intimate relationships, you'll see the description of coercive controlling fits all the other coercive controlling patterns there are. So this is not copyrighted just to one gender view of coercive control. And we're all in this together then. So if we're all together, how can we not team up together to fight the same enemy, which is coercive controlling relationships, wherever they may be?
Oh, I agree with that 100%. I like how you said that copyright too, because that really is. I mean, we no one person or group owns the final story when there's so many elements to it. That's a very good way to put that. Thank you.
And then I had been thinking, as I read about your backgrounds, and yours particularly, Dawn, is that you were what they call in cult language, you were born into. So children who are born into a cult, you sort of think, well, how can they ever know that they're in a cult? In the same way that all of us are born into our families and we learn from our families what culture we're in, community, belief.
Do you mean in the religious aspect?
Any kind of cult, political, therapy cults, as well as religious ones. You're born into a family that belongs to a cult. And how does a child know? Yeah. Steve Hassan's answer to that is somehow inside, a bit like both of you, I guess, you kind of know there's something wrong here.
Yeah, when I wasn't actually born in, they weren't members of the particular church at that point.
But you were born into alienation is kind of what I was saying.
Oh, yeah.
Alienation is like a cult, so you were born into alienation.
Gotcha.
Yes, we've never known anything different.
Anything
That's our normal world.
My world,
Yes.
I've never known a time until recently that parents were actually required. They were interchangeable. They didn't need to be the same person. It could be, you know, any one of them. My mom disappeared at 2. My real dad was my sole caretaker for the next 2 years. Then she showed up again, took me away from him and gave me someone new. And then I went through my own divorce. And when my ex-husband told me, I'm never going to pay you a dime in child support, I believed him. I thought, fine, you're not required. I can do this without you. You know, this is the way life is. So I never knew that there was that family bond. I didn't realize that there was something really, really deep. And then when I held my son for the first time is when I started to realize that connection, but I hadn't applied it to the parents. I only applied it to me and my son. And when I held him the first time is when I first felt unconditional love. And then it started stirring up things inside of me, such as anger. And I wasn't angry at my son. I was angry at the fact that I had never known this feeling before him. Why not? And then I started asking the questions like, well, what happened before him? I was someone else's child. So where is that bond? And I started kind of like reverse engineering these feelings, going back to realize I never had that feeling with anyone, all the way back to the time that I was 2 and I was living with my dad. That was the last time I can remember the feeling of love to that extent. And that was such a young age, and it's such a vague feeling, but I know it's there. I remember very specific details and things about that time frame between 2 and 4. So when I was taking into that other world, it felt more like my Twilight Zone or the cult, where it relates to the same types of things that goes on in the cults, where that coercion and you have to do exactly as you are told to do. And then you bring the religion aspect into it. On top of that, it just compounded that.
So that's a wonderful story of a belated hitting you of what's missing in your family and organizational religious experience. And the word, Alyse, you may know the different kinds of attachment theory. Attachment just means love, bond, but attachment approaches are now hugely useful and researched, and there's a number of different ones. So that kind of attachment, bond, and attachment is about a specific attachment to individuals. It could be a good one or a bad attachment, but you are biologically, let's say, neurologically attached to that person. And typically in an alienating or domestic abusive family situation, you will be attached to one person, but it could be somebody who's not good for you, who is controlling you, who is, so you're describing more of a situation where you weren't attached to anybody apart from your dad. So that's a bit unusual. But in a cult, you are attached to something, but you're attached to the organization. And they use the words, daddy, brother, mother, you know, the organization.
Yeah.
In religion too, of course, God the Father. So you give up your personal attachment that you need to be a healthy individual. You give it up for the organization, which then uses you for their purposes, which is not good care. So I'm just trying to say that there are these differences between families where you can sort of see who you're attached to but isn't good for you. And in the cult, you sort of think, I don't belong to anybody because nobody's looking after me, which is true. But you're having your attachment potential abused, taken over by the organization and the big brother, as it were.
Yeah, and it's not to say that I didn't love my mom or didn't have a bond with her. It just wasn't that strong one that I felt with my child, and it definitely felt different. And so maybe, like you were just explaining, you know, was this an attachment? And I don't know exactly how to explain the attachment with my mom. It's still kind of blurry, and I still find things out. So I'm still working through quite a bit of those things and realizing what attaches to what in life.
So I'd just say, I know we have a little network here in Scotland where we're good friends, those who focuses in cults and whose experiences in cults and whose abuse has been in cults. What you discover is any cult story is also a family story, right? Whether the cult takes in the individual young adult away from their family, or whether you're born in to the cult, and then somebody misbehaves and gets put out and sent to Coventry, silenced.
Yeah. I was threatened to be excommunicated several times.
Excommunicated. So you then have an alienation. It's just much bigger. There's just a much more obvious big force causing the alienation because of the wider religious or cultic organization, which is requiring your mum and dad, say, or your mum, to have nothing to do with the dad who's moved out, or the dad must have nothing to do with their child, and the child must learn that dad is now a child of Satan or an evil person, doesn't believe, he mustn't be even talked to.
Yeah. Yep.
So the phrase I use, just it comes to mind, is relationships that take you in and cut you off. That's my sort of short phrase for all these coercive control relationships that you find across the board, between cults all the way to intimate partner violence and parental alienation.
So what if I was to toss in the word emancipation to you? And the story behind that for me is when I turned 16, I was standing up to my mom at this point. I was telling her that I'm done. I was leaving. I'm moving out. I'm going. I don't care where I go. I'm leaving. And in order for me to go, her requirement was that I needed to be emancipated because she no longer wanted to be responsible for me, if that was the case. So if I was leaving, I had to be emancipated. So we signed all the paperwork. And as far as I knew, I was emancipated at the age of 16.
Is that like a legal thing in our?
Yes, it made it so that I was responsible for myself, that she could not be held responsible for my actions. I became a legal adult at the age of 16.
Yeah. What do you think of it?
Well, when you're describing it, I wonder if it's part of the, if you're not going to play by my rules, then you're out kind of thing. So
your intuition, is that what you were feeling?
Well, I never thought of it that way before until now. I'm just wondering if how that plays into some of this.
What are my thoughts? It's almost like in your situation, something good enough had happened to you to give you the capacity to decide you wanted to be out of this. Now, that means you are much better equipped than many people who are in coercive relationships, because they know, they may either know they're trapped but know they can't move because they will be killed or punished or hurt, or they are so taken on and brainwashed that they don't even know. Steve Aston describes when he was taken into the Mormons, he would say, "What do you mean? This is the happiest I've ever been. And this is, the last thing I want to do is break out of this." So what I'm saying is, if you had, as a teenager, the impulse that you didn't like this, then you managed to hold on to something of your soul, let's call it, or your human spirit. Your family and the culture or the religion you were in hadn't managed to destroy that. And so give them some credit.
There is some truth to that, because I was told at some point that the reason why I have the memories that I have is because my brain held on to what considered my true identity. And that the twilight zone is what I call this part of my world, where, you know, after the abduction and the new family, all of that, and coming in together, joining the church. And actually I was also raised Mormon. So I have that in common with Steve. But that whole world always felt foreign to me. It never felt like that anchor that I think I always held on to. So I think when I turned 16 and dealing with all of the bullying and the rejection, because I was trying to speak, I was trying to talk about what was going on. I was trying to tell people that my stepsister tried to murder me, tried to kill me, and strangled me to death, nearly to the point that I was passing out when our parents pulled into the driveway. All of these things I tried to talk about, and then I was bullied for even mentioning it. I was shunned. People just could not believe that this perfect little Mormon family that we see can't possibly be true, so you're a liar. So then the church started working against me, more or less, where I knew the truth, but they were forcing me to not talk about that truth. And then when I acted out as a teenager, as teenagers do, and they felt that I was doing things that weren't by their book, they threatened to excommunicate me. So I think a lot of these things that started happening is what that final stand was, when I finally stood up and said, I'm done, I'm out.
No, sorry, Alyse, you wanted to break into us. Another thought before you come in. One of my colleagues here did her academic study on, the word escapes me, for Jehovah's Witnesses. There's a word for being shunned. Shunned, is that right? Anyway. So what she discovered in her interviews was that after feeling devastated by being shunned by their family, so this is the reverse of emancipation. The family says, you're out, you're excommunicated, you're nobody, you're a sinner. We don't ever want to speak to you unless you come back and apologize, and we'll take you back in. She said that they all realized it was the best thing that happened to them later. So first of all, they're devastated, suicidal, can't live, don't know how to live in the wide world. But at the end of it, the point is they were taken in and then they got kicked out. Now, being kicked out of somebody who takes you in should be the best thing that happens to you. And in these cases,
very interesting.
And Dawn, you, I think, got your excommunication in first, which is why I'm saying you must have had, through the experiences you've described, being half murdered and so on. I don't know when they happened, but you were pretty sure this wasn't something you wanted to stay with, and so you had enough capacity to think, I'm out of here and there's a way to do it, I want to be emancipated. So in a sense, you excommunicated them before they did you.
Yes.
Sorry, Alyse, I'm interrupting.
Oh no, that's okay, that's true. Whereas for us it was very different. So we weren't able to do that. Our enmeshment was too strong, and one of my siblings still describes it as our alienator mother was the sun and we were the planets who revolved around her. Oh. And if we went too far out into the orbit, she would become very dysregulated and we'd have to move back in to regulate her, and then whatever consequences came with that. But moving out and even having a discussion like that would never ever have taken place, because she was way too unpredictable to have a conversation like that. So and plus we had no voices, so a lot of the decisions that we have made as older children and adults were not decisions that were often discussed. Well, they would be discussed and then they'd be shot down if they weren't agreed with, and then we'd have to change it around to what the alienator would agree with. So it's a different, different world, but we were in enmeshment and we're not coming out of it at all. And if she had her way, we would all still be there in that space. But it's very interesting what you talk about, Dr. Child, with regard to people who've been in cults, religions, and have been excommunicated all of the different words that are used for people. Some of the ones that I'm seeing, which I think is very interesting, because in the last 2 weeks, I've had 7 people come to me who've been asked to leave at different time periods of their lives from different religions. I won't mention them. There's 3 different ones, and they are all coming back in with they've got different experiences. Because of the COVID thing, I think that they're feeling extremely cut off, more than normal at the moment. And what I'm also finding is a lot of the families that they come from who were part of the decision to remove them, they're having secret conversations with. So there's this huge longing and yearning, it seems to me, in the community, where these people who haven't spoken for 10, 20 years are now speaking, which I find really, really interesting. This is a new thing in my practice, and I seem to have quite a few coming to me, including, and they're not coming by themselves either, they're coming through the family members who are still in the cults, and they're saying, go and talk to her, because I talk to a lot of the family members in the cults. They're saying, go and talk to her. So then I'm getting the other ones who are being excommunicated coming in as well and hearing about their experiences. And some of them are saying it's the best thing that ever happened to them. But on the other side, they're saying, I miss my family. I miss growing up. I miss seeing all the children growing up. I miss everything about it. But what I'm also seeing, it's not generally one person who's being asked to move out. It's 2 or 3. So it's really device, like it's half the brothers and sisters are now out. So it's this huge divide. So they're questioning what's going on now, but they're doing it in secret. So I just find that absolutely fascinating at the moment.
That's quite a remarkable story. I've not heard of a story of a therapist being contacted by people inside a cult, because usually therapists are seen as outsiders,
I know.
Satan, or whatever the cults
believe. I know.
Dangerous
very,
because
very
you're going
blessed
to create new thinking and new ideas, and a cult or a coercive relationship cuts you off from other sources of support, and they want you to work 24/7 on the cult's ideology.
Yes.
So to have both sides is a remarkable story.
Yes, and what I use in the room, because I got asked about this today actually, because one of them said, I've had a conversation with the rest of the family about that person coming to see you, and they were very concerned that you were going to talk them out of it. But I said, this is the person said, she doesn't do that. She just listens and doesn't judge us. That's why we go. And this is where the unconditional positive regard comes in. Because personally, I do not feel that it's my position to sit in the room with people and judge whether or not they should be in or they should be out. What I do is I sit there and I speak to them about their pain, their story, and I listen to that part of them. Nothing else to do. I do not speak about the rules and regulations or anything like that. I hear them. That's why I believe that. But
what happens?
Responding.
I wondered what happens. That sounds great, but at some point you will either persuade somebody to go back into their family and cult, or you won't.
No, I'm not going to.
No, but what I'm saying is that the cult, the one side will feel you've let them down because you've not done what they would have liked you to do with their.
No, yes, no, I'm very, very clear on that. I definitely do not do either of those things. I sit in a completely non-judgmental position.
Wonderful.
Whatever
Steve
else.
Hassan, you probably be interested in reading more of what Steve Hassan has written, his couple of books and so on.
I
he
will.
talks, and he taught, you know, again, it maps on to what we talk about for parental alienation or domestic violence, for that matter. People are trapped in intimate relationships, because what he says is you cannot talk. And Ryan Thomas also talks about how to send a text message to your child in an alienated relationship, and he says, here's the 20 things wrong with this text message. There are things you just aren't going to get anywhere, because the moment you challenge them, you will put their defenses up and they'll say, that proves that you're evil, I'm out of here, you're out of here. So what Steve says is you have to just focus on whatever kind of contact, connection, rapport. Remember the time we used to go to the park?
Yes, yep.
Didn't we have a great time? Did you remember how we liked this cartoon?
You can't pull on their guilt or anything, the positive memory, yes.
So then, what Steve says, what you're angling for is extremely neutral opportunity, rather like you've described, Alyse, where you're saying, I absolutely am not wanting to tell you what you've got to do. I'm just asking, could you give us a bit of time, a couple of hours, a few days, so that you can hear some more information from other people. If you then make up your mind to stay with the cult, that's absolutely your decision. So it's very similar. The terms you're talking in are very similar to how Steve talks about it. It needs to be like that.
I actually request that from my father as well, Dr. Child. So when he came back into my life after 25 years, I absolutely want unconditional positive regard from him, because I cannot hear him talking about stories of what happened, you know, all those years ago and how bad it was, because I'd already been listening to them forever and ever and ever, and there's not an event or a day goes by where one of those stories does not creep in, let me tell you. So when he came back on the scene with me, I absolutely said, I cannot hear it. I don't want to hear it unless I ask you. You are my soft place to fall. You hear and you do not basically say anything else. And I had the best relationship with my father, who we were terrified of. We were told he was going to take us and he was a monster and he was going to kill us and we'd never be seen again and things like that. So to form a relationship with him after, like, I was 6 or 7 when he left, but again meet up with him when I was about 30, then to walk back into that space and to trust that he's not going to do all those things. My intuition was saying he's not going to hurt you, so I had to trust that. And then he does, he unconditional positive regard with me all the time, and I can ring him 24/7 and I know he's going to be there for me.
Is he happy? Is he happy with that instruction?
Yeah. He understands that that's how it has to be. And over the years, because we've been back in contact for 20 odd years now, I've loosened the boundaries a little bit, but that was my safety. And he can joke and play around with me and do things now that we have a very, very solid relationship. But that was the very beginning. I couldn't have dealt with anything else.
So what you're describing is what lots of people describe to parents who've been alienated. And as they await, hopefully, for their child to come back to them, there are different kinds of guidance. But one common one is you need to be ready, fit, mentally fit, and then walk right back in, and you don't want to hear any more about the 20 years in between.
Yeah.
No.
I would like to add in there that when I reunited with my dad, I didn't tell him, of course I didn't know about the phrase and the unconditional positive regard. Somehow he knew, and he just didn't engage in any bad talk about my mom at all. In fact, when he did say something, he would preface it with, I dearly, dearly loved your mom. And then he would explain something, but he always waited for me to ask. He did more listening than he did talking. He would only talk about certain elements that he felt that I was ready for. And then if I asked or pressured, he would approach it very delicately, and always said, you know, I still loved your mom. You know, that was all that you know, that he could really just say that, yeah, we had some troubles. We were stupid kids. We were just kids. So we did stupid things, but all in all, I always loved your mom. And that's how he always left it with me. He never said an ill thing about her. And when I talked to my mom after reuniting, there was still many stories that she kept digging up and trying to spoil that relationship that I had just started to engage with him. And it was easy to tell what was really true and what wasn't true at that point. But it is very, very true that that was a blessing, that's how he responded. And it made it possible for us to have a lot of conversation that led to healing in our 2-year short little period of time that we had together before he passed away. So 2 years is probably too quick for most. But if it's going to be quick, it needs to have that element of that, you know, he showed unconditional positive regard in that aspect. And that helped me to come to him.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've said this or written about it elsewhere, but what you've just both been saying about how it worked and how you set it up to work in your own minds and with your distant parent, you know, this is golden advice and encouragement to those parents who've had to wait for 20 years and those children who've had to wait for 20 years. This is really important lessons for people who are in that terrible situation to learn.
Thank you.
I agree.
And I'd be very interested to talk also about prevention, because we are apparently the generation that's known as what was it, Dawn, the least parented or the fatherless or the no parents or something generation from the 60s and 70s.
The least parented generation.
That's it, the least parented generation, and we don't want that anymore. So let's talk about prevention. So let's learn from our stories and the mistakes.
Okay, well,
and how do we stop this?
So just to say a bit about how different prevention is from what we've just been talking about. You're a few decades old, perhaps 25 years old, I don't know. And you're talking about having to wait all that time and discover a distant parent, discover that you have been in a situation that you don't like and shouldn't have liked. And then you're now looking back on it. So, and you were born into it, let's say. So, you know, that's a life, you both have had a lifetime and have come out of it. So that's like 30, 40 years, whatever age you are, down the river. In order to prevent what happened to you, we've got to go probably up that river 30, 40 years. So prevention is like 80 years difference between what you've just been telling me you've been through and what somebody needs to think about to try and stop it happening to other people, right? We kind of got to get so far up that we change the culture in some way. And I'm not saying it's the only thing that needs to be done. Everyone needs to do something with what's facing them. And the immediate urgent challenge when you're drowning in a river is to get somebody out the river and save them. And so we need all attention on that. But somebody also needs to go way up the river and say, look, I'm sorry, I know you've got to deal with the urgent situation and all you've got is family courts and that's how it is and you need to campaign for this, this and this. So it looks like I'm a real wuss. I'm going to go up the river and in 80 years' time, 40 years' time, there may be some benefit. You know, you can see how annoying it is to many of your listeners, observers, people who are in the audience, to be asking permission in a sense to do that. But if you think about it, say, with something like cholera, any of these illnesses that we're facing, COVID, for example, we don't need any other metaphors. If you know, we're trying to prevent it as best we can immediately, but take cholera, which typically, when it happens, when there's an epidemic of cholera somewhere, Of course, these people are dying, and it's dead easy to save them. You give them fluid and salt and so on, and the next day they're still alive, where if you didn't, they would die. So there's plainly a need for medical teams at the front line. Okay, but if that's all we did, we would just be having cholera epidemics all around the world and hundreds of thousands of medical teams. So I'm saying that domestic violence, parental alienation, family courts are like the medical teams who are pulling people out downstream. They're the ambulances at the foot of the cliff. They are doing an important piece of work, but if that's all we do, then all we're having people is jump off the cliff and drown in the water. So prevention means you have to go way upstream. And what you discover then is something completely different solves the problem. It's good sanitation for cholera. It's not the medical teams may not, you know, obviously their research shows that it's a bug that breeds in bad water, but what I'm saying is something completely different than family law may be the solution for the terrible.
Well, they maintained lives in the process until that was figured out. That was determined.
Correct. So you need your medical teams, but then once you know that good sanitation, good water supply prevents cholera, hardly anybody needs to know about cholera. A few people need to know because there are some places it comes back. But if you've got good water supply across the world, cholera is a thing of the past, as many conditions are. So what I'm saying is that's the model of prevention. And if you think of it like that, even though good water supply won't save the life that's dying in front of you, because that needs medical treatment, it's really important somebody tries to think of what's going to prevent cholera with good water supply. And of course, good water supply does a whole lot of other good things as well. So I'm just trying to set the scene because your audience may just be so offended by somebody saying, I've got some answers that might work in 40 years. Well,
that's very important. And I'm very glad that you pointed that out. And thank you for that analogy too, because I think that's something that everybody can actually understand and see. And that is definitely what needs to happen. There's got to be people working on this right now. And there's a lot of people working on it right now. I'm still working on it right now, but I'm also projecting into the future, working with Alyse, trying to find out ways, how can we change how this is going? And how can we what do we need to do to treat people that are coming out? Because they're the ones that are college students right now are looking at becoming the next generation of parents. Are they going to be good parents? Or are they going to be falling into the same generational trap?
Absolutely.
Are they going to follow the same trauma pattern? And I'm very passionate about this because I believe we need education in the school systems. We need the frontline workers, because I'm a frontline worker. I have been for 33 years in mental health, and the way we stop this is we teach the teachers, we teach the police, we teach the domestic violence workers, we teach the therapists. Because I've been through university and nobody mentioned parental alienation until I hit family systems therapy, and by then we discussed it, but it wasn't taught. So everything I've had to learn by myself about PA and read it all myself. It's not mentioned, and that's very worrying, considering I'm a clinical psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And so many of the community that I speak to have no idea what PA is, let alone how to spot it, or the signs, or even just the subtlety of the language of parental alienation that alienators use with children, and it's rife. The couples that I see, the separated people that I see who come in to speak to me, who are not able to see their children, and they're grief-stricken and they don't understand, and they've been to therapist after therapist after therapist who have not mentioned PA. It's frightening.
Yeah.
And
same with the criminal justice side, where when I studied victimology, this was never a topic in that. And then when I got to my thesis, I was working on my master's. I started to finish my final paper. I decided to do it on childhood abductions and human trafficking. And this is pretty ironic because that's when I actually discovered the fact that my abduction was not legal, that it was not okay. And we joked about it quite a bit growing up because my parents will say over and over again, you know, that they just came down and kidnapped me. And my stepfather actually put those words in his book. And he actually says those words that, yep, we just went down there and kidnapped her. So when I started looking into this, I found a group. It wasn't in the material that I was studying. I found a group.
You're back.
Oh, did I freeze?
Froze a little, Dawn.
Where did I stop? What was the last thing you heard?
It caught up with you, but we were talking over you. So.
Oh, well, the abduction pieces were not discussed so much as far as the parental side. They talked about human trafficking, but they really didn't talk about parental childhood abduction. And the group that I joined at the time, I don't think that it exists today, but at the time was working really hard to change laws in Congress. And they actually got Eric Holder was the director at the time, and they wrote a book about parental childhood abduction being illegal in all 50 states. So they've made some progress, but my paper ended up being about my childhood and discovering. That's when my path kind of took off on working through the parental abduction side of things. And that's how I found my way to parental alienation, but that took 10 years to actually get to that extent. So it started out with that first part, and then 10 years later, after reuniting with my dad, is when I started learning this word parental alienation.
But I've got a question for you, Dawn. Did any of your school teachers or any community workers or anybody even ever notice what was going on with you? Because none of them noticed what was going on with us. And we were being moved from school to school to school to school to school, different states, different names. Nobody said a thing. I
think the most I got was, wow, what an interesting life. You should write a book. I think that's probably the only thing I remember any of them saying. And I've been told over and over again, you need to write a book, you need to write a book, this is a movie, you know, and I know a lot of people hear that. We need the frontline workers to be educated and to notice the children who are going through all of these behaviours and symptoms, and we need education out there. Absolutely. We definitely do, because you're working in the mental health and I was working in the criminal justice, and neither one of us heard about any of it.
And one of my cousins who works in a special needs school for secondary students has said that since the COVID has hit, family and domestic violence has gone up through the roof in these children's families, and there's also all the parental alienation has absolutely gone through the roof as well. And she said sometimes she looks at the kids in the school and there are so many children who are parentally alienated, it's not funny. And she's noticing this because she's an adult child of PA herself. So that's a very interesting thing. But what do you do with all these kids? What can you do with them is the question. How do we stop this?
So I'm jotting down notes as dozens of ideas come up. So what you were saying kind of at the start there, Dawn, was about education, and Alyse, you were talking about education of professionals, and Dawn, you were talking about education criminologists. And you were raising a question which I think is worth talking about, which is, what do you teach, right? I think you were hinting, let's teach about parental alienation, right? But I think if you just taught about parental alienation, then you'll find there's a big fight over, but we need to teach about domestic violence and child abuse. And you'll end up, children never going to be learning maths and English because they're going to be learning about relationships the whole time. So the question of what you teach is to be considered.
Absolutely.
And how you raise awareness in the general world, how you teach government to get good policy in place. And if you're going to do prevention, you're going to teach something really positive that naturally leads to good teaching for how we prevent. If you go straight for let's teach about parental alienation, it's like let's teach about cholera instead of let's teach about good water supply, right?
Yeah.
You need to get the right formulation of what you're going to teach, because schools are not going to be happy for you coming in and telling their kids about these awful situations.
Well, and the communication, I think, is key, and having the right communication. And Alyse actually has empowered even the smallest children to have conversations. So if that conversation could be geared towards, you know, what's going on at home in the domestic violence, and they start asking the questions, how are you? And then if they're not okay.
Yeah. So that was one of my model. I've got it too.
Oh, look at him.
Oh, you have it. Yes, there's two, the children's and the adults model, but we teach the kids from age 5 and up to be first responders in their own classroom.
And what I love about both of your work is this wonderful pragmatic, because you've come up with something not only preventive, but you've actually come up with a thing to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So Dawn, you invented the CSI, the diary that you can hand over to the police when your child gets abducted. It's just so beautiful.
We're very pragmatic.
The SEMPI thing is you're even teaching children to be first responders.
That's right.
And it's just such a delightful angle to come at it.
Yeah.
So you're not teaching parental alienation, you're teaching how to be a first responder, how to tell the police where your child might be. So I'm just saying it's that kind of creativity and cleverness, I'm going to call it, but it's so simple, it's so obvious when you think about it. That's what we're needing. And the trouble is, if you spend all your time fighting with domestic violence and parental alienation and family courts and teaching everybody about those things, you're actually not going to learn how to do SEMPI and CSI and other things.
No. I've got the SEMPI model in about 20 countries across the world, Dr. Child, and it basically, if we teach this in the classrooms and the children all know the model, all the teachers have to do is that we teach, send it, they just have to go on my website, they download the PDF and all the instructions. It's a free model, it's a pay it forward model. I have it in the schools and the hospitals, I have the children's and the adults version, but for me, for the children, it was about teaching them how to have a voice. So this is the model here, and basically if the children ask each other, are you okay? And one of them says no. Then they say, well, how's your senpai? And senpai has S for sleep and safety, E for emotion, M for meals and clothing, P for physical health, and I for inclusion. And it covers there's 8 questions under every letter that the children can ask each other. They're very simple questions. How did you sleep last night? Are you having trouble going to sleep? Did you get enough sleep? Do you have any dreams you would like to talk about? Did something wake you up? Do you feel safe where you sleep? And these are really interesting questions because children who are in domestic violence will talk at this point and they'll say, no, this is going on, or I'm sleeping at my other parent's house, I don't like the new mother. Like, these questions are designed for children who have a lot of things going on. If we have another child asking them these questions, they answer them. And then, would you like to talk more about sleep, or would you like an older person to help? So if it's too much for the children, we teach them, go to an older person for help. And then they have a voice around what's happening for them. I designed this model because this is the model that I would have liked people to have asked me when I was a young child, instead of feeling completely invisible. If someone had sat with me and gone through this with me, I could have had a voice and someone might have noticed what was going on with me as well.
Yep.
And so it also the children then swap it. It's an altruistic, reciprocal, pay it forward model. So we teach the children, they swap it. So there's a listener and a sharer. So there's a power equality. There's no power imbalance. It's not a teacher asking. It's not a counsellor. It's another child. And then they swap it. They ask each other. If it's too big, they go to an older person for help and they talk about it. And I have 7-year-olds in classrooms saying, my friend's talking about killing themselves. And they don't know how to handle that. They don't know how to hold them. So they go to an older person. This is stopping suicide. It's a suicide prevention model for children as well. So, and then what we do with this is the children can take it home and teach it to their parents or their grandparents in hospital. So it's an intergenerational model as well. So we've got it in hospitals and schools, nursing homes, mental health units. I have lots of people in mental health units using the adults version. A lot of the inpatients teach the other inpatients and actually take it to their psychiatrist, Dr. Child, and say, can you ask me these questions?
So let me respond. And you've got the website up behind you, and it sounds a bit twee, we might say, but I think it's brilliant because, let me tell you, first of all, in Botswana, I gather, the normal greeting every morning is, did you sleep well?
Oh,
right?
perfect.
The normal greeting. So I think what a wonderful question that gives somebody the opportunity to say, well, actually, I woke up and worried about yesterday, or I didn't sleep well.
Yes.
There's something about that connection between mental and physical well-being. Single question from your list. And the second thing is, I was telling you earlier before we started that I went to boarding schools from an early age. And so my life has been trying to learn what a family should have taught me, a bit like you, Alyse. And nobody seemed to realize what I didn't know, and my parents didn't. They were good people, but they themselves didn't have a decent upbringing to know how to tell me, show us. And then I became a doctor, and you'd think doctors should know quite a lot. We're bright people, but of course intelligence is one thing and emotional intelligence is another, so I didn't. And I was so puzzled, I thought, I'm going to find out about human beings. What is a human being? So I went into psychiatry, and of course psychiatry is an appalling degradation of people into their brain chemicals, largely, with some psychology and psychotherapy added. But still you're learning a sort of weird language, psychoanalysis or something. So I'm still ignorant. I get my final big job, a consultant in the NHS, and I'm learning more from my colleagues who are ordinary people. The secretaries who say, did you see she's had her hair done? And I say, no, that's the therapy that's making, no, she's had her hair done. That's more important than your therapy, right? The secretaries say that. And social workers who've had a different kind of background to me, they just knew far more. Now, all I'm saying is, this is what I wanted to learn. And so you're talking about children learning. I'm saying not only children, but certainly adults, but professionals. I've seen some really good professionals, and they're good because they know how to ask these ordinary questions. And I'm sort of thinking, what do I say? Well, I'm a psychiatrist, child psychiatrist, and I still didn't really know how to talk in an ordinary way with children because I hadn't had that education, let's call it. So that's to come back to how do you prevent? This is how you prevent, is you learn to make a small step. This is not going to solve everything, but it's a step towards asking and thinking and finding out.
Yeah.
And my colleague, Judge Philip Marcus in Israel, who I'm working closely with on a prevention project for Parental Alienation study group. I don't know if you're both members of that, but it's an international network that is what it says on the tin. So he and I, Philip Marcus has developed probably the best that it can be family court system in Israel. Everything about it is properly qualified and trained and prompt and so on. But he still says 3 months is too long, right? Now, his other interest, though he's a judge, a retired family court judge, his energy is going into school-based programs, right? So I'm going to make sure I mention to him your school-based program, Alyse. because I'm quite sure that that's the sort of thing that they're really looking for. So they're trying to, and they're not just catching parental alienation or domestic violence, they're just trying to find kids whose parents are separated and who look as if they need a bit of asking some questions. Okay.
This finds them. This comes under the social and emotional learning category within the schools, and this finds the children. And once they're found, once they're flagged, then the counsellors and the teachers can come in and have more serious
and then they too
investigation.
then need to know when they have to call in somebody extra because they're spotting things. Because the thing that is difficult if you aren't wised up about it is the easiest thing for a school to do is say, but the mum looks perfect. She's a great mum.
The alienator always does.
And the dad says, I've not to contact the other parent because they're a nasty piece of work, as evil as sin. You mustn't contact them. And the school says, okay, you know. And so schools, like everybody, they sort of believe what's in front of them because it looks very believable.
Yes.
Like you were saying, Dawn, about
and alienators present beautifully. They're usually very confident. They're very, as long as they're getting their own way, they're quite regulated. They're quite decisive, quite directive. You know, they can be very deceptive. Actually, it's a good D word.
So the question would be: is how do you teach to spot that, right?
Yes.
So that's like 2 or 3 levels up beyond simple.
Yes, that's very tricky. That's very tricky training.
So one of the ideas I had, which is, a lot of people will say, what do you know, Dr. Childs? You don't actually work with the front line. Well, I'm sort of saying, well, yeah, but you don't work at the back line. You know, so I'm sort of saying there's other things in the team.
We each have a part to play. We just all hold hands.
So one of my ideas that people have said, what use is that, was there's a blog called The Theatre Critic's View of Parental Alienation, right?
Yes.
Because most of the writing on parental alienation is as if it's a psychiatric disorder or a syndrome or something. You know, there's an argument about it's really science or not. And what I'm saying is, well, if you think of it like it's a play, and you are in the audience watching this play, you might come up with what's going on quicker if you were like a theatre critic than if you were a scientist. And so you'd say, look, this is a really stupid plot, and it's crap acting, and it's like an operatic scenario. You know, this is like melodrama, and it's very bad melodrama. Everybody's acting a part. You can just see it. It's just, you know, that's what's wrong with it. Now, of course, that's not to dismiss it. You then say, why are they doing this very poor play? You know, how are they recruiting each other? And they're not even doing their lines properly. You know, these lines have obviously been given them by somebody else, and they don't belong to the child. You know, so if you look at all this sort of features of parental alienation, what they shriek at you is, this is a bad act. You know, that people are just, it's a melodrama. This isn't true. So then you have to say, why would people be doing this? Because there's a serious question to ask. You know, why are people going to put this on? But the first step is to say, there's something this isn't true. It's a bit like, I used the example in that blog of, in psychiatry, you have what are called, used to be called hysterical syndromes, like you had a paralysis. But what you discover is it's a paralysis that doesn't relate to medical explanation. It relates to layperson's explanation. So the paralysis is like, you know, the numbness fits what a layperson thinks. So it's like a drama. It's you know, people are using the wrong script for paralysis. And so the doctor knows it's not a real paralysis. So then but then they say, oh, so they're just attention seeking. But you know, what you should say is, why are they attention seeking? Why are they having to do this to get my attention? So you need to go beyond that. I know Wasn't
there a model that you keep asking why until you've answered all of the questions? Yes,
but you need to not dismiss it, because if you're a doctor and it's not really medical, you're going to say, go away. What you need to have is, and psychiatrists too, go away. You've got personality disorders. So what you need to have is a doctor who says, you know, this isn't true. So I wonder why it is that you're thinking this or need to present as a paralysis.
Yes.
What is it you're really trying to tell me? And of course, what you discover is people often have lifelong secrets or things they can't say.
That's correct.
No, because they don't believe they're going to be believed, where they think a paralysis.
Correct.
So you have to have, so that's the kind of story and education that adults and teachers and professionals need to go that extra mile and say, okay, you don't fit my categories, but I wonder why you're trying to persuade me you do.
Yes, absolutely. And Carl Rogers puts it beautifully. He says we need to make them safe to reveal their own inner world. And one of my mottos is people don't ever care how much you know until they know how much you care. I didn't make that up, but it's something that has stuck with me for many, many, many years. And the treatments that I tried to come out of enmeshment, a lot of them did not work, and many of the people who worked with me did not ever tell me I was in parental alienation or enmeshment or anything. It wasn't until I started working with a Catholic nun who taught me everything about moving out of the enmeshment. So, and this is why I do a PhD in this, because I want to look at the treatments that the adults are doing and the children, and what is working, what isn't, and look at the treatments that were used on me. And for me, everything I do, because I get sent people who are very severe, very extreme. I work with severe and persistent mental illness. I work with a lot of personality disordered people. For them, I have to hear them. If I don't hear them, if they don't trust me, they will not tell me their stories. They won't tell me. For example, I have one girl who comes in with borderline BPD. Nobody wants to work with her. She talks to me about all her childhood trauma of being locked in fridge by her mother with schizophrenia, her sister as well. All of the attachment stuff. I teach her all of this stuff. She's working through her BPD. She understands what her triggers are. She knows what the enmeshment is. She knows when she's starting to get emotional charges for anger. She knows. She's learning. She has hope. She's been thrown away by a lot of people, a lot of therapists who won't work with her, but she comes into me regularly and we do work really deep, very profound work. She's understanding it, and she is, I have to hear her, and that's that, make them safe to reveal their own inner world.
So again, we're talking slightly downriver here, because you're talking about picking up people who need help, spotting they need help, and providing it. So that's still like after, that's like intervening a bit earlier, but not before. We're not preventing.
Yeah.
We maybe by intervening, of course, you help prevent things get worse, and you make them.
Yes. And the effect that it has on her children as well, and their children, because it runs straight down the line. So working with the adults as well as the children to, yeah.
So I suppose just another thought about what it is we teach, and I would say if we're talking about relationships that take you in and cut you off, if that's the general term, and if the best approach is an attachment-based approach to understand as well trauma and stress and post-trauma and so on, and personality, all of these things, in my view, attachment approach is the best way. And there's a range of different attachment approaches, and one of on my blog site I talk about the one that I think is the most deeply worked out one, because it applies to everybody, including the people who are the most disturbed, evil people that we would call them, you know. So it's a way of understanding how we come to be the sort of personalities we are, including the bad ones.
Yes.
So I would say that's the thing to teach about professionals and children, if you like.
Yeah.
Relationships take you in and cut you off, or if you have to call it coercive control, because then that brackets us together with all the people who are concerned about how to spot these relationships. And then the other thing that I like to do is I like to say, look, it's really important to understand coercive people often don't think they're being evil.
No, that's true. They don't. That's true.
And I use an example. I've always, all through my life, and for reasons that may be obvious, I've said I'm so helpful that I'll help old ladies across the road even if they don't want to go, right? So I've always used that phrase. But if you think about it, my helpfulness is being coercive. And if you look at coercive people, they can be charming and very effective people, or they can be evil people, but nearly always they feel that they're right, arrogantly right, often entitled. They can be foster parents, I know, and professionals who are very sure that they're right about stuff. So what I'm saying is, you can be coercive starting from a point of being very helpful, and so that helps you get on the ball, on the track of, well, okay, why are you so helpful? Why am I so helpful? And you know, the sort of exploration of that went with people who are prepared to be open about it. It helps you realize you're being helpful because you weren't helped, and you're now trying to help other people. You two are probably the same as me. You know, you're driven to help other people because you weren't helped, and you want to make that right for others. And often you're, in a sense, running away from your own need for help in some cases. So I'm just saying that kind of world of understanding relationships and helping may lead us to understand coercive control, which is not to say you then don't, it's not that you put up with things that are being done that are harmful. It's just that you begin to understand them. You begin to have a deeper discussion than these labels of personality disorder, narcissism, psychopath, parental alienation, domestic violence.
Yes.
You know, if you can step back and begin to have a different, deeper conversation.
Yes, yes. And I suppose I'm lucky because I've also been trained in disabilities for years and years and years, and we are taught to ask the person what they need. Do you need help from me, or are you okay to do that yourself? And that's actually what I model the Senpai model on that too. It's an empowerment model. It's not telling anyone what to do, it's just asking people what they need. And yeah, sometimes for some of us who've grown up in that space, we can tend to be rescuers, and it is for us to stand back and question, because it was a nun who actually said to me, Alyse, why do you rescue everything? Because I did animals, people with disabilities, people with mental health, and people who work on the street. I still work with them, and sometimes for me it makes me feel good. I get a dump of feel-good chemicals from the altruism, but also I like to have I ask them what do they need from me, and then teach them if they want to, and then empower them and stand back. It's like that phrase, teach a man to fish. But I had to learn how to do that. Stand back and watch them. Don't fix it all the time, because that was my trigger. So it's a very interesting conversation, Dr. Child.
Yeah.
So just to add, there's a blog about Alexandra Stein, who's written about her experience in a political cult. She's British, but it was in America that she had the cult. And she's written a book on attachment theory applied to coercion in cults. And it's probably not the most sophisticated version of attachment theory, but it's a really good book. And if you want to read a short blog that summarizes it, you'll find her on my the alienation experience.org.uk.
Okay, that's very
but
good.
because I'm saying for professionals, attachment theory would be my go-to way of understanding trauma, coercion, enmeshment, relationships, children, and so on.
And the family and domestic violence too. Sorry, Dawn. Just
that's okay.
The people who come into me with that stuff, they're just, if they have been children of enmeshment and insecure attachment of things, are highly likely to also be involved with people who can be domestically violent and not know how to move out of that space. That's a very tricky space for people, and it's all that coercive control again. And sorry, Dawn, what were you saying?
That's okay. I wanted to, we talked about the Senpai model, and I wanted to talk about the CSI model a little bit, because
Yeah,
a
it's
couple years
brilliant.
ago, I was dusting it off because it's hard copy, right? So people have to handwrite stuff into a diary. What I do, it's basically postcards with information prompting type things that parents will complete and fill out and collect and gather, so that there is a history of information. And then if something, and I wrote this during the time that Kyron Horman went missing. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't get it done in time. This could have helped, because there was a time, there was like 3 weeks that had gone by where investigators were still asking questions. They were still trying to find out, where did he, they knew where he went to school, who did he hang out with, where did this person work, where did that person work, what were all these connections? So they were trying to expand their knowledge. And if this type of model had been used, a lot of that information was in it. And when you're asking traumatized parents who have a missing child, they're not thinking clearly, they're not going to answer the questions correctly, they're going to leave out information, making that investigation harder for the investigators, because they have to continuously go back, ask more questions, ask more questions. So if this particular thing was ready, and they could just hand it to the investigators saying, I can't talk, but here's everything everything that we have is in this. They can go through there and they're like, oh, there's phone numbers. This person lives down the road. That person drove that red truck. They can then start immediately in their investigation. And that is the point of the CSI model. However, because it's hard copy and you have to actually take pen and paper and write it down, I'm trying to convert it into a more digital format. So about 2015, 2016, and especially right around the time I found my dad, I really started thinking about it. But one of the things I wanted to add to the guidebook is what parents should be telling their children. And I got a lot of pushback on the things that I told my kids growing up, because they felt like that's too much information to be talking to a child. But my kids knew that we had a family phrase, and that if anything happened, if there was somebody that was to take them, that person needs to know what the family phrase is. And that if they did not know the family phrase, then they knew that they were not to believe anything that was being said. That no, my mom did not ask you to come pick me up. No, that my mom did not tell you that she no longer wants me. Or no, you're telling me my mom no longer loves me, but I know for a fact, because my mom tells me that if anybody tries to change that or coerce me out of believing that there's so much that parents can do to make sure that their children never fall victim to that outside influence of somebody outside of the family or part of the family even, because a lot of abductions are, at least like I think it's 75% or more of abductions are done by someone that the child knows, which means a lot of it could be family. So when my children were growing up, I told them, I love you until the ends of the earth, and because I'm your mom, I will never stop loving you. So if anybody tells you that I no longer love you, it's not true. And when I started hearing about the PA world, I wondered, I kind of got myself stuck, because am I perpetuating or helping an alienator, convince the child? Or am I helping the child understand that both parents love them? I think there's a very delicate, I need to be very cautious about what I put into this guidebook as far as what you're telling the children, so that the children know that no matter what happens, the parents do love them. So it could be a double-edged sword, where it's helpful that the child knows that if Uncle so-and-so or Aunt whatever comes in and says, your mom doesn't love you, so I'm here to take care of you, that the child would know that's not true. But I also don't want that to be used against the child, where, or actually against another parent, so that the parent still has that ability to convince the child that yes, they do love them. So it depends on which parent you are. And I don't want my book to be like one way or the other, one side or the other. Does that make sense?
It's a difficult, I mean, you're right to see the difficulty in there. And what I was thinking of is Alyse's description of enmeshment, which turns into the child looking after the adult more than the adult looking after the child. And the child is also, like us, a helper. You know, children are bound to want to help their parents, however much we think they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. Children will. And so it's a difficult thing for adults, and it certainly is difficult for children to know, when does that stop being all right? When does it, you know, you need a few senpai questions to cover this. When does it stop being all right to be giving up everything else in your life to look after your parents, one or other? That would be the measure of when it's not all right, is when you've got a parent saying, I love you to bits, you know, everybody else doesn't love you and I love you to bits, that sort of cultic kind of quality.
That's what I was hearing.
And the child is going to be, probably feels, as people do in cults, feel this is love bombing, you know, this is wonderful, I'm totally loved, I'm going to devote my whole life to you and everybody else can go away. So, you know, it's trying to catch the quality where a child is devoting their lives to looking after a parent in that way. And the child will be convinced they're doing the right thing. So they're not going to be ready to say, hang on a sec, that's not right.
I just don't want my model to contribute.
Yeah, it's hard.
I thought, Dawn, that your model was specifically for children who were kidnapped by someone. If we take parental alienation completely out of the picture, somebody who comes in, takes the child, and they're gone, and your kit, the CSI kit, has all the information of the child that you can hand straight over to the police.
That is it, but I think when I created it, I had myself in mind as well. Everything that I thought was important, things that I knew where I was growing up, places that I hid, things that I thought of as a teenager, I tried to put into this model so that investigators could, you know, pull that kind of information out depending on the age of the child. You know, did they run away, or were they actually abducted, and that kind of stuff. But it would,
if a child is abducted by the targeted parent,
it could apply to a single parent creating this particular database. It doesn't have to be two parents, so it could still apply to parental abduction.
And I guess this sort of couple of things. Abduction is clear cut, it's sudden, and you don't know where they are. And it could be a parent or it could be somebody else. Then you've got parental alienation when parents are separated. So you then have, it can be quite immediate, but it could take several years to fully develop so that the child doesn't see the other parent who loves them.
Well, alienation can still happen after abduction, like in my case, where it was abducted and then the alienation perpetuated.
Yeah. And then you've got, to extend that same idea, you've got people who will say, well, actually, the alienation was happening for 15 years before we separated.
Yeah.
Right? And so that family is together, but there's something not right happening in it. So there's another question of how do you spot that, and how do you help that family that's still together? Like you were both in families that were still together, sort of. And,
oh, no, mine wasn't. But I've got a family at the moment where the woman is, and I'm just picking her, it's not a gender thing, is showing extreme signs of alienation and enmeshment with the two children against the husband. And it is very clear cut. And I'm having to talk to her about, because she's not letting the children go and see the grandparents, his parents or anyone to do with that side of the family, because they said something she didn't like. And that
so they're still living together.
They're still together, and he's terrified. If he leaves, she will take the children and he will never see them again. And they're both presenting in my room, and I'm working with her on what has happened with her in her childhood, that she's thinking like this, and telling her kids need both. They need to be seeing the grandparents. So it's very, very tricky. There's so many different perspectives.
That's the same as victims of domestic violence will say, I can't leave because I'm worried for the children, or
yes,
I've certainly heard that story. I can't leave because my partner is not going to let me ever see the children again. I'll never get to put them to bed and read them a good bedtime story.
And she's being domestically violent towards him too. He's terrified. He went to the police and told them, and they laughed at him. Yeah. So it's very hard out there.
So the other thing I wanted to mention earlier was, you probably know the, I think it's famous to me, film called Victims of Another War. Do you know that one? Okay, you don't. It was originally produced probably 10 years ago by an organization that was called PACT, Parent and Children Together, and that they've moved on to just abduction. So it's AAA, against abduction. I can't remember what AAA stands for. But that film, Victims of Another War, is 35 minutes long. And it's a story of 3 children grown up. And it's clearly about both abduction and alienation, because in that film they tell, sure, they were abducted or abducted back by one parent. They describe how after abduction, the abducting parent then has to complete the alienation. Your mother never loved you, she's died, she's, you know, so the story that is built up in alienation before separation is then built up after abduction. But it's the most beautiful film to, in half an hour, show the full connection between child abduction and child alienation.
Let's find it, Dawn, and put it up.
What's the name of the film again?
It's called Victims of Another War. Victims of Another War.
Yeah, we'll find that. That's very interesting that you say that, because
I mean, I can send you the link.
That would be great.
It came up right here. It's on YouTube and Amazon.
Yeah.
So
because the organization is now specialized in abduction, because of course that's easier, right? Abduction is easier for the reasons I was saying before we started. Abduction, everybody switches on. It's bad, urgent. We must do something.
And the problem
abduction is easier to run campaigns on.
Yeah. The problem I have with abduction, and it's once the child's found, where everybody thinks, okay, it's done, but it's not done, because you have reporters, you have police officers, investigators, you've got psychiatrists, you've got parents, you've got friends, you got, you know, family members, you got all these people that are coming together and searching for this missing child. The missing child is going through God knows what. So when the child is found, everybody's like, phew. And
job done.
The reporters go back to another story. The police officers pick up another investigation. The family members are like, okay, fine. Everybody goes back to work. Brothers and sisters go back to school. And the child is sitting there thinking, what just happened? And then they don't have that support system in there. So in a lot of ways, I tie alienation and abduction and the long-term effects on the child to almost being an equal thing. The trauma is nearly the same. And when I pull things out of the Department of Justice little handbook that they wrote, and I post that as and compare it to the alienation, it is amazing how the comparisons are so similar. And we have laws in place to protect against abduction. So then why would we not have laws to protect against the alienation when it comes to the long-term effects on the child?
Yes.
It's the exact same thing.
So can I don't know how long you've got, but we could spend all day, I think, on it. So I'm pushing the prevention thing back and back with you, if that's okay. Sure. Awareness and stories to shock people are really important in raising awareness and motivating people to do something about it. But there's something funny about our field. It's like everybody else says, oh, I don't think that's really could possibly be true. No,
yeah, we hear that a lot.
They must be stupid to fall for that.
Yeah.
Well, that's your story, but I bet that there's some secret story about why that parent was a bad person. You know, there's a whole culture, and really the only thing that stops it is when it happens to you. If you're domestically abused, if you're alienated, suddenly you think, oh, hang on a sec, what's this about? And so you're ignorant and you suddenly have to make sense of it. So nearly all of us who are in this field will have some personal experience, because before that we didn't believe it really happened, or if it did, it wouldn't happen to us, and somebody else's job to look after it.
Yes.
So there's something about that we need to, when we're talking about prevention, we're having to do more than just find a group of people who've been through it, because the world can still say, well, they look a bit weird to me. You know, somebody over there says it doesn't really happen, cults don't happen, all this kind of stuff. Cults face the same thing. So we have to overcome that, and part of it is real stories of what you've been through, but many people don't want to listen to more than 2 minutes. So we need to have some, and children are the best witnesses. So yes. So then we're still talking about things that happen that are bad. To me, to get prevention fully in place, we have to make more of what's in some people, including your own strap lines in your emails. You say things like, children should have a right to love both parents, or both parents love them, right? So that to me is the core value that everybody will agree with. Everybody in the world will agree with that, even though they don't believe things happen that make, in fact, they believe it so strongly that they don't believe something could go so badly wrong. There must be something wrong with a mother or a father who's been alienated, because why would that happen? No good parent would possibly dismiss someone without good reason. So we have to remind the world of this moral. You don't have to have evidence. Everybody knows that parents, children, and the wider family, and everything else that goes with a parent and brings to a family, if it stays together, that is what children need. And it doesn't last until they're 12 or 18. It lasts for life. Now, you've been emancipated, so you could say, no, it doesn't. But I would still say your emancipation is from a family that you know is, in a way, your family, and that was them, and they're part of your story. So
yeah, and I'm still connected to them.
There's still something there that makes the family you've emancipated from your family. So what I know is happening is that some of us are developing a more proper kind of campaign organization based on promoting this idea that children should have positive relationships through all life's changes with all those who love and care for them. Now that seems such a bland statement, but once you start unpacking it, once you start unpacking that, then you start from a new position, which may not immediately have effects on the areas we want to have effects.
Yes, this is very tricky, Dr. Child, because I hear this statement, and for those of us who've grown up in severe parental alienation,
oh, yeah.
It's a different world, and people don't understand what it's like for us when we go home to the alienator after a contact visit or a court, whatever, or we've said or done something that they haven't liked with regards to seeing the other parent or the other parent's family. They can be all sweetness and light, saying goodbye, the whole business, but then when you come home, it's a very different story, and that can last for a very long time.
Absolutely, Alyse. But notice how you've gone from the question of how do we prevent this whole thing, you've leapt straight into absolutely valid, a sufferer, and that won't touch me, right? What we're talking about is...
I suppose my point is that some of the younger children in severe PA, the alienators are so tricky that if we just assume that the child's going to be okay when they're taken out of that space, even very young.
Yeah.
What's it going to be like when they go home? Because we don't know this. So
Absolutely.
we're trying to prevent it. We've got to get to the alienator. We've got to help them.
So and to tag on to that, changing the laws isn't going to be enough.
Yeah.
We're going to have some deep mental health therapy. I think mental health should be available to everyone, and I think it should be a condition of divorce. And actually, to back it up even further, I think it should be a condition of marriage. And I know that there are some institutions that do apply it, but I think there needs to be an overhaul of that, because it's so easy. You can go to Vegas and get married in 20 minutes as long as you have the license in hand. But it takes, a year or even 6, 8, 10 years to get a divorce. And it's all about property. It's all about children. It's all about the money. So what are we not teaching in the beginning? When you get married, the values have changed to such an extent that.
So all these, what you've said, Alyse, what you've said, Dawn, these arise from, they imply the positive statement about what we want for all children in the world, right?
Yes.
And that's the positive statement that leads to you saying, but what about this, and how are we going to deal with that? And Dawn, you're saying, how are we going to change the laws or educate people? So, until we restate that that's the assumption that we're working from, so a bit of history I think helps. For billions of years we've evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, the human race has evolved. Throughout that, and I'm not saying it was all peaches and cream for everybody, but throughout that time, families kind of were together. They were part of a tribe. They lived in villages. The community looked after kids. All sorts of terrible things that may have happened. People died, and 50 years ago, we suddenly did something completely different. Clever human beings that we are, and we completely failed to think what we were letting out of the box when we first of all had contraception, so that you could have sex without having babies. Women were free to have sex without having babies. That there was emancipation in the general sense that people, including children, women and children, were now legally individuals, equal, as it were, or equal in worth to the men who used to have chattels and slaves and wives and property. 50 years ago only, we took the lid off the box, and nobody knew what we were going to end up with as a result. And then, of course, since then, all kinds of other things have happened, and we're now dealing with what we happen to have handy, which was family law, which was about chattels, basically.
So then, divorce.
And so what I'm saying is, if you start from this assumption and reminder, which we all know, and then say, so what would we now do different if we had started 50 years ago? So that's the kind of way we then can build up to how do we educate, what do we teach, how do we spot early those who have not been prevented. Okay, well, so there's a whole framework of thinking that doesn't come naturally when you've been a sufferer.
I think that is also true. You can tag that on to how the laws changed here in the States, where it's the Child Protection Act, and how the village isn't the village. It's not it's more, that you could swap out the village for what other people would consider CPS, or, the Department of Children's Services, the government. So now it's all of a sudden changed, morphed into, it's not just your community, it's mandated through government, and then there's actually federal funds applied to this now. So it became a beast where divorce has become a $50 million a year industry.
Billion. 50 billion, didn't they say, roughly, a year?
Yeah, so the product here now, because of the act, and like you were mentioning how the 50 years ago we changed certain things, we change things without thinking about the actual end result. We don't apply any thought or process on how, or even model that. How is that going to look in 10 years? How is that going to look in 20 years? They don't project or anything. They just think, oh, we're just going to change this. This will make things better. But they don't plan the how to make things better part.
Yeah.
Yes, we've got to get, I think anyone who's wanting to get married really needs to go into premarital therapy and talk about what does that look like? What are your values?
Yeah.
What do you want with your children? What do you,
exactly.
what
For me, I
happens
would have
if we don't get along?
Yeah, I would have
All
asked
those
my husband,
conversations.
what religion are you? Are we
Yeah.
going to parent the same way? Do you believe in, you know, punishment? What kind of punishment? How often? Are you going to participate in that? Do you change diapers? Do you go to the grocery store? Do you do household
Yeah. Are
chores?
you vegan?
None of these
Do you want the
questions.
baby to be vegan? That's the latest
I
conversation.
didn't ask any of these questions, and I ended up in a catastrophe of a marriage because I didn't have that forethought. I didn't have that knowledge, and I was raised in a very pro-marriage religion, a very pro-family, and that's one thing I will say is, you know, the Mormons are very pro-family, and I still did not have the knowledge that I needed to make sure that my partner had the same thought processes, the same beliefs, the same core values. And we were so different, and I still got married.
The thing is, I mean, I absolutely agree with what you're saying, but it's a really difficult task because you've got some young person, like we all were, and we're deeply in love or lust.
And that's all.
Here's some clever Johnnies telling us to ask these questions. And we know that we're in love, and this is the love of our lives, everything will be perfect. The point is, love bombing is not chosen by just luck. Love bombing is what happens when we fall in love in westernized cultures where you don't have arranged marriages. And this state of mental intoxication is not a good state to make lifelong decisions. No. And then it's only been about 100 years that we lived long enough to bother about it because, you know, most people died by what we now think of as young adulthood, 40, 50 years old at the most. So you didn't have long enough to have 9 kids, 5 of them die, and then you died and you didn't have to find another 40 years with the same partner. So we haven't thought of that.
Yeah.
I have my cynical prevention strategy is don't partner up. If you do partner up, don't have kids. You do have kids, don't separate, right?
Yeah, it's permanent.
Here it is.
I think when you're going to get into people that are looking at getting married, I think maybe they should watch what it's like to go through divorce court and see some of these very high conflict problems of people that were so in love exactly where they were.
Oh, yes. So how much it costs.
Turn into what it costs. I know people that have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to be a parent. And, you know, with my father not being married to my mother felt like he had no recourse because technically in the eyes of the law, he was not really a legal parent.
But you see, you'll still face the problem. Young people who are in love and passion will say, yeah, but not me. Yeah. We know.
No, that's right.
You've got the recruit. When you're passionately in love, you can't tell the difference between coercion and true love. And you certainly won't be in a frame of mind to watch some video about being in court fighting each other.
They won't believe it.
So you have a real... Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I'm just saying it's not an easy one to crack.
I mean, hey, I'm good at coming up with ideas. I'm not sure that they'll all work, but I'm good at coming up with them.
But that's what prevention requires. We do not have for certain good ideas, and that's what, you know, that's why prevention is.
So we got to keep trying.
Mm-hmm. We have to try every blinking idea we can come up with.
That's true.
In order to stand a chance, one thing seems to me for certain is that anything, you know, we know why family courts look as if they're absolutely necessary, because you're dealing with people who absolutely won't do what they're told by anybody, even courts. So you can see the logic, but you have to say that a system that puts people in a boxing ring and has mudslinging cannot be helping children's welfare. That's absolutely certain. Even if it does it in 3 months, it's still too long, because by then children will get entrenched, possibly. So I'm just saying we have to think of doing something with our energy and our planning that happens before family courts, adversarial family courts, get going.
Yeah.
I have to say, the other thing is this organization, which Parental Alienation Study Group, has an annual conference which has been messed up by COVID. So what was going to be in September in Brussels is going to be next year, we hope, and it's going to be prevention themed. And we've got a lot of energetic European presenters lined up, judges, lawyers, but also therapists and psychologists. And they're because continental law is different to adversarial English-derived law like America has, like Australia has. It's possible for a good lawyer and a good psychologist to do some good things just by having good ideas, because they can make them happen in a way that won't happen in adversarial courts. So they're really keen to show there are other ways of doing family law and helping people after separation than America.
I'd like to be there.
So that's on the cards. And that's part of that's what's leading into our wider prevention project thinking.
Yeah, because we need a very strong system of counselling and coaching, community support, mediation, and we also need the therapists to get on board if they have if they're doing any couples work, or because anyone who comes in to see me, if they're not married or married without children, then I bring out the Gottman's cards, the Gottman Institute cards. They have cards. 53 questions to ask before you get married. They're brilliant when, you know, the oxytocin has worn off and they're now starting to get into a bit of trouble, but they're going to get married, but they're not sure if they should. Hit them with that's where the therapists need to come in, but we need to have good training around that stuff too. And
it needs to be harder to get married than it is to get divorced.
That's
well,
the Vegas wedding.
Well, just to bring in an idea which wouldn't work is bring back arranged marriages.
Oh, I've been watching a documentary on Netflix with the Indian arranged marriages, actually.
My mom tried to set me up with somebody.
Oh, there you go, you see.
I was 16. It was before I left, and the guy that she tried to match me up with was 22. And
it's a power imbalance there already. Goodness.
But I think that's what we're dealing with. This is why it's so new to the human race. We've unleashed this thing. We've made divorce as easy as that. We've made kids as easy as that, and not having kids and having, you know, and we don't realize what we've tampered with that has been lasting for billions of years of evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. We aren't. It's a bit like, you know, we invented the motor car and we're still learning to live with it. We've invented the internet and we're still learning to live with it, and it'll take another 100 years maybe. So we're so clever. We've unleashed this thing on ourselves, and we have done nothing to be prepared for what it's produced. And of course, the thing that's happened in the middle of it is, and quite correctly, concern for children's safety from abuse and emotional abuse. Now, that wasn't there 50 years ago. We just assumed parents were good. The internet
adds to a lot of this.
Child sexual abuse was discovered, and most of the people didn't believe it. That's happened in the last 50 years. So, you know, suddenly we've got all the makings of an absolute storm.
Absolutely, it's the perfect storm, and then you add greed and money into it, and then we've got a battle of our lives with regards to prevention and treatment for those who've been through the system. We need to look at it very holistically. It's huge.
And thinking about the cybersecurity side of things, I'm gonna put on my cyber hat here for a second, where we have information technology, we have the internet, and as much as that information could be very problematic for a lot of people because of what they're equipped with. They're not really equipped to handle. Too much information isn't always the best thing. So we have our hands on a lot of information that we're not used to consuming. And then on the other side, we're able to find out and discover things that were going on that we wouldn't have known otherwise, such as the child sexual rings, the human trafficking. There's all kinds of other things that have been discovered because of technology. So it is a double-edged sword when it comes to, you know, when is too much, and when you look at it the other way, it's like, it's not enough, we need more.
And we know too that a lot of children in PA who aren't taught to have strong voices and a sense of self are quite vulnerable to people who are coming in to sexually abuse them, because a lot of the ACODs, we call them ACODs, adult kids of divorce and separation, that we talk to have also backgrounds of child sexual abuse as well as parental alienation, because there's so much fighting going on, they're not noticing what else is coming through. So that's a discussion for a whole other day.
Steve Hassan will talk about the internet and what you're saying, Alyse, but as well as the positive side, because cults have completely been opened up by the internet, because previously cults were able to stop you going and buying books, whereas now with the internet they can't.
And it can be in secret. I mean, it could be like, we have the dark web. How many people know about the dark web and how to access it? So there's so many different chambers and stuff that can be used as concealing that kind of information as well. So it's really hard to navigate something we have absolutely no control over.
So there's certainly part of the prevention project is learning and building resilient relationships, knowing when you're being allowed to think for yourself and given information, freedom of relationship and access to things.
Yeah. And
so
then
that kind of discovery of resilience, and that includes not being made to feel that if you're nervous or offended, that somehow you should be protected. You have resilience means you've got to be able to overcome anxiety and unnecessary anxiety. You've got to overcome this wish to be a victim, which is so strong nowadays. Everybody knows that being a victim is the most powerful thing you can be, because then everybody has to look after you. So,
oh yes, I don't subscribe to that at all. I don't like that at all, that thinking. I'm all about empowerment, and I think, Dawn, we stand together on that, don't we? Because
the one thing that's
really need to have a voice.
Yep. I think the one thing that Alyse and I share in common, and I would like to see in others as well, is we have this element of persistence, and we're very
resilience.
Very, and I think that's what has pulled us out, and what I've called it before, climbing out of hell. You know, because
it is
climbing out.
Good analogy.
So we have to have that perseverance, that persistence, that tenacity, and tenacity.
Yeah, we'd be dead.
That's the reason I'm alive, is because I had tenacity.
I'm distracted. My cat is complaining about being fed by eating plastic from the waste paper basket over there.
Oh dear, we better let you go.
Well, no, it's not a serious distraction. I was just wanting to say, one of the things I did preparing for talking with you was along the humanly possible theme, just to come back to that, and also to kind of bring back an example of prevention right now, as it were, in the worst hell that you're in. I was sort of thinking through my 10 years of learning and talking with people and discovering and just thinking of so many dozens of people I know who are not public figures necessarily, but there are lots. You know, you spoke with Bill Burnett recently, and you know, amazing public achievement and so on that he's achieved. But there are lots of people I know who are doing things that are humanly possible that you'd think are impossible. And so in a way I could spend another couple of hours telling you, without naming them, a number of other stories of people who are surviving and thriving and doing stuff. But just one that's taken my interest, given my views about family court. And these are, I've now know 4 people who, in quite different ways, have decided to do their crisis, parental alienation, and more, without going to family court. Right? They're in an absolute nightmare. They're in a traumatic state. They found ways to cope with that. Some of them are even doing activist things, campaigning things. You sort of think, how can you do that? To me, it's almost, you shouldn't be doing that. You should look after yourself and your own case first, and later on you could be a campaigner. So 4 people, in various ways, have decided that it's better to not go to family court. It's better to fight battles with your mind still intact, because what happens in family court is that your mind isn't your own. You're not, you're not allowed. So when, for example, they're facing police or social work saying, but it's a contact problem, you should go to family court, they're saying, no, it's not parental alienation, they don't use that word, and it's not a contact problem, it's a safeguarding problem, right, for example. So what I'm saying is, I'm wondering if this is parents having a go at taking things in their own hands, rather than believing that family court is the place that will solve it. And if you take things in your own hand, then through things like public law and child protection services, which of course are not perfect, but you may have a better chance of fighting your way through that, talking to schools about your kids and so on. So I'm just mentioning that as a kind of something for your audience.
I agree.
To think about. I'm not recommending it. I am recommending it, but I'm also realizing that this is no easy course, because you have got to find deep, deep resources in you to cope with the most appalling, mind-bending challenges that you'll face. But at least you'll have a mind. You'll have your mind.
About on the MPO side, we're talking about trying to find ways that we can not only just change the laws, because I think it's going to take more than that, talk to other people outside of that organization. And even with Ginger and her Erasing Family documentary, I think it's very important that we focus on the general public as well, and not to leave them out, because they're the ones that are they're members of that.
Front line. They're front line.
They're front line. And if we can create more, I think film is a very good way of doing this. Films, documentaries, commercials, little, marketing, anything that someone can actually watch, because when you're watching something, you're detaching from what might be problematic or a reality in your world, and you're engaging in that right brain, that creativity, and you are relating to the person on the screen, not even realizing that you're being taught a message. You're receiving something, but the film itself or the information itself is changing the hearts of people in a very simple, very friendly, very low conflict way. And I think that is a very important way, or a very important tool that we can use to teach the general people. And that includes everybody, right? I am not just sharing that just with the lawmakers. I'm not just sharing that with mental health experts. When we talk to the general public, they are all those people. They are the mothers, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the teachers, the lawmakers, the Congress people. They are those people. So we need to level that, like Alyse does with her model, is to level that power and make everybody equal in this learning model.
And the general public all know somebody who's practicing parental alienation. You just have to walk into the dog park and they say to me, so what are you doing, Alyse? And I explain, I'm studying people who divorce, and then when one person denigrates the other one, and next thing we know, the other parent's not seeing the children anymore, and they go, oh, that's that person over there, and they're my wife's,
That's the wake up. That
cousin's
light
doing
bulb.
that, and they're just like, what's it called?
Yeah.
Said, get on the internet and have a look.
That's a beautiful, I agree with Dawn that the general public is who needs to know this, and they do. And then
So
Alyse, I noticed that
you
you didn't say, when somebody says, what are you doing? You didn't say, I'm learning about this thing called parental alienation.
Yes,
Raising
no.
Family is very disciplined in trying never to use the term parental alienation, because it's a trigger word. And although we think everybody knows what it means, we ourselves are actually a bit confused.
Yep. We call it the emotional.
And it certainly leads to people saying, what's that? And then you have to say what you've just said, Alyse, or something like, you know, it's when one parent turns
just basically I say when two people
and then they say,
and it's not.
I know that, there's a guy over there and my uncle did it. And
that's right.
Everybody knows
and they all know someone.
So the question is to make sure that we get those videos and the words right when we're
the right message.
Videos have to be short ones, not lectures in conferences. They need to be.
It needs to be engaging, something they would want to stay and watch.
Right, and they need to be done artistically.
Have you seen my little video with the children in it, where I'm asking, are you stopping one parent from,
it's just a little
just the little short ones that I do, with the children in it, just their awareness
I haven't
campaigns.
seen them, but I'll look for it,
Yeah, they're just awareness campaigns, and just about
I think we need to
kids needing both.
Up our production on that.
But
that's just a general community announcement. I do a few of those.
But I think we need to use, and Ginger is one of them, people who are professional media filmmakers and PR people.
I'm looking for
social impact campaigners, and we need to look at them. The people I know most is it's the organisation is in Australia for kids' sake. I think you, Alyse, will know them. David Curl.
I know that one with
I'm
Aaron
looking for them,
kids.
so send them my way.
Aaron, he had four children and their mother. That was a dreadful situation. That was dreadful. Could you, do you know about that?
They're involved in this prevention talk and creating an even more prevention-focused organization with some really high-quality. David Curl, who does that, is a media, that's his skill and his job. And so we haven't yet developed them, but he's about to develop good media messaging.
Very tragic. And I think he feels very, very, very let down by the family court system over here too in Australia, from what I can remember.
We're looking for an alternative.
It's getting pretty late here. I'll need to go and get ready for work. It's nearly 10:30 p.m. so I've got to go to bed. So are you both happy to finish?
Yes.
So on that note, we will end our amazingly interesting and informative interview with Dr. Child, and thank you all so much for tuning in and watching us, and we hope that you'll be able to share this video out to everywhere across the world, your world, so that we can get more community members hearing our message and listening and trying to help, and not just letting all of these behaviours go unnoticed, and actually have a voice around them for the sake of the children. So thank you so much, Dr. Child, for joining us, and thank you to Dawn for doing another wonderful program with me.
Oh, I love it. But I wanted to also extend my gratitude for you coming on the show, Dr. Child, or Nick, for participating and just having this very candid discussion, because I think it's very important that we all join together, work together, have these discussions, and figure out what we need to do. Because as you mentioned, we change something, but then what do we do afterwards? We need to make sure that we're carrying that and supporting that going forward. So I appreciate everything that you have brought to us today, and hope that we can continue to have this open discussion. We really value everything that you brought to us.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure, and thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Alyse.
I wanted to ask really quick before we go, if there was anything that you would like to say to our audience, or if you wanted to leave some contact information or anything that you're supporting, any other information like that.
I think I'll just send you some links to put in under the video. Is that all right?
Sure, absolutely.
That's probably best.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us and for another episode of Humanly Possible. And remember that if it's humanly possible, we may be talking about it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay.